Yes.
I attended Jim Shore's Friday morning meeting that he had with Kent Beck last week.
Okay.
It was about emergent design. It was a wonderful thing. But he brought up an interesting story about the acronym YAGNI. And he said that you were the person that he created it for or on with.
I don't remember that. Was he saying that he did it? He did that in that I wanted to do something and he didn't want me to do it, and he said he ain't going to need it.
Yeah,
that certainly was possible.
Yeah,
it certainly was possible.
Yeah. Basically, he came up, or you came up and said, "Hey, we need to do this, and he's like, "You ain't going to need it." And yeah, so he had more depth and detail.
I don't doubt that a bit. I don't doubt that a bit. Well, you know, we learned an awful lot of interesting things there. And a lot of it was to not be afraid because, you know, I think maybe the most, apparently the most, one of the most interesting things that Kent taught me, at least, was the idea that all process in software, and maybe all process everywhere, is a reaction to fear. And in order to really grow, you have to start thinking about, well, what is it I'm afraid of?
Yeah.
And when you come in and say, well, we need to do this, and that, and let's go do it. Well, that's based on fear that if you don't do it right now, you won't be able to do it later. And it turns out that if you work the way we really ought to be working, the natural side effect of high cohesion and low coupling is that you can add things later and have a minimal impact on other stuff. And you can change things later and have a minimal impact on other stuff. And so if you always attend to cohesion and coupling, you want lots of cohesion and not very much coupling at all, it turns out. Remember that. You don't want to do it the other way. If you attend to those things, then you can make decisions very, very late, and you can change your mind about stuff.
Yeah.
And that frees you up from all kinds of other problems. And so a lot of what I do and what I think about and what I try to tell people is to a large degree based on the idea that you need to know what it is we're afraid of so we can do something to alleviate that fear. Because as Jeffries always says, quoting somebody, some French guy, I don't remember who it was, that fear is the mind killer. Because when you're afraid, you make really bad decisions. You do really stupid stuff when you're afraid. If you don't believe me, watch any teenage slasher horror movie. Right? They're afraid and they do incredibly stupid stuff. And if you just say, wait a minute here, you know, there's only one of them and there's 12 of us. Let's just kind of calm down a minute and think about what the right move is.
Yep.
So
nice. And so the quote that you started with, Ron, actually made me think of Frank of Dune, Frank Herbert. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total annihilation.
Yeah. I think he actually borrowed that from somebody else, because Jeffries always says it's somebody else. And Jeffries has read every book and remembers all of them. So we'll have to ask him who it is. There's actually somebody had a rant on fear, and I think Herbert picked that up from him. But Ron will know.
Yep.
So what you all want to talk about?
All right, I'm gonna kick things off a little bit here. For some of you guys that don't know, that might be new to the group, this is the Iowa.NET user group based in Des Moines, Iowa. The S's are silent. Been around for a couple of decades now, and it's we've grown into a community where we believe in the community for software development, and we kind of jump around with languages, and sometimes we talk about things that are really applicable to all developers. I got a chance to meet Chet before, had dinner with him a couple of years ago, and just had a blast. And I remember hearing him talk about some things with the Chrysler C3 project, some of the early days of XP, some of the things about how he made user stories so we would all love them so much and get to be so good in Jira. And I thought, let's bring him in and talk through some of those stories a little bit. Before we get
the abomination known as Jira, yes.
Before we get super into it, though, I did want to mention our sponsor is Robert Half Technologies. Is there anybody here from Robert Half who would like to introduce the company or their experience with the company at all? I don't recognize anybody there. I was messaging one of the people. They weren't able to make it tonight, but they have been a sponsor. Normally they would cover pizza, and we would have pizza and pop in person, but we're not there just yet.
If no one from Robert Half is here, would somebody like to talk smack about him then?
I see a lot of people.
Requires some knowing.
No, but we should talk some smack about that Eric guy from Ford.
He's a chump.
Ford's a fine place. They
Yeah, we'll
have a better idea.
Yeah, go ahead.
I did have one other thing that I wanted to mention before we kick off. Did anybody have anything about local communities or local community groups that are doing things for nonprofits where developers can help other people? Does anybody have anything they wanted to talk about there? Hint, hint.
Yeah, hey, Dustin, thanks for bringing that up. I know I talked to you about it last night. I just wanted to say that I currently work with the president of the group, but DSM Hacks is coming up in June, and they're sitting at about 50 people and need about 10 more to get as much done as they'd like to. It's a charity event, 48-hour coding hackathon type thing. It'll be my first time participating, and she had asked if I'd be willing to share it with the group since I've been participating with the .NET user group for a couple months now. Thank you.
What is the date?
I am unfortunately driving right now. And I will share a link to it later. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
What is the date for the hack?
I believe it goes from the 2nd to the 4th. I think it starts at 5 p.m. on the 2nd and ends at 8 p.m. on the 4th.
In June?
Yep.
All right. And I can speak a little to that as well too. I was actually one of the founders of the Des Moines Charity Hack, and the basic idea is we'll get people together for 48 hours. Usually, I think we're looking at 60 people this year. So it's a 48-hour hackathon. At the beginning of the event, we'll get maybe 10 or 12 nonprofits coming in where they say, hey, we have a need. We're doing this stuff with paper. We don't understand this technology. We wish that we could do this thing. It would really help us help other people. So then the developers come in, and some of the other people in software development, they will come in and help the people who are helping people. So usually in about 48 hours, we might build somebody a website. We've built mobile apps, find different ways to help people out so that they can be a little bit more efficient and effective. And it's a great event. Once I started traveling for work, I stepped back, we got it launched, and we've got other people taking the helm now. And it sounds like we could use a couple more developers for this year. So if you're interested, please contact dsmhack.org, I believe.
There is a buy-in for it. It's about $25, but that will cover, I believe, some of the food costs and a t-shirt. And they're welcoming any experience level. So if you're new, don't feel like you can't sign up just because you don't have the experience. It can be a good way to get some experience.
Yeah, it's a really fun event. Yeah. people will try out all different texts too. It's great. If you know WordPress, that's awesome. All right, thanks, Stefan.
Thanks,
All right.
Ben.
And on to our main event. We've got Chet Hendrickson here. Chet was at the C3 project, as I mentioned. That one project over at Chrysler that kind of kicked off all this crazy XP stuff and TDD and all these things that people are trying to get us to do today. Chet's also one of the signatories for the Agile Manifesto. And we just wanted to have him come in and talk about some of his stories. And if people have questions, like what the hell were you thinking? Now's a good time to bring that up.
We were just making it up. It seemed like a good idea at the time. You know, we didn't know. We didn't know.
Hold our beer.
Hold our beer. Take a while. Watch this. Well, the C3 project was an interesting thing. The history of Chrysler's payroll is rather odd and interesting. When I came to Chrysler back in 1988, I guess, Chrysler had just acquired American Motors. And I was brought in to work on a project to deal with the retirement systems, paying of pensions, and integrate all the pension systems to pay all these people who had worked for all these weird companies that turned into American Motors over the years. Rambler and Nash and Kelvinator and Hudson and all kinds of weird car companies. And I worked on that. And I came in originally as a contractor. I was on a 30-day contract that was renewed, I think 32 times before they finally gave up and hired me. And I eventually became the team lead for the pension systems at Chrysler. And while I was doing all that, the payroll systems were having to also deal with the challenges of this new group of folks. And Chrysler had 4 payroll systems because, you know, more's got to be better. We had a system, and they were all, well, 3 of them we cared about were all basically COBOL unit record systems, or had a fixed length file, a record for every employee, at least one record for every employee, sometimes more than one record for every employee. And it would go through this big process of edit, where you added transactions to it, and then pay eventually, and all that stuff. And we had employees who got paid once a week, and they were the hourly employees. And they all had time cards and all that kind of stuff. And so that was one of them. I paid about 100,000 people once a week. And there was what was called the biweekly, or the salaried employees, who got paid every 2 weeks. And we had the monthly or executive payroll for folks who got paid once a month. And those last two were basically the same program originally. They got split and had diverged based on the various needs. And then there was a 4th system for people who got paid a whole lot of money, and they just basically made up how much they got every month. And that was for the executives and people who worked in another country. So if you were a U.S. employee and you got sent to Mexico but still got paid in the U.S., you got paid out of that system because all your taxes were very weird and all that kind of stuff. And so Chrysler had been wanting to, that group was off the table. They were run by a completely different organization. But there was a desire to replace these old systems. And they had gone through a couple of different attempts to do this. They'd actually purchased a package and had failed to be able to implement it successfully. And there were mostly political reasons for that. And so it was decided to write our own. And that got started. And eventually they came to a point where they needed to staff up. And I joined the team at that time. And we had hired a consulting company to come in and help us with this, because we felt we needed help. We wanted somebody with a little more experience than we had in the technologies we were using. And so we got trained in Smalltalk, which was the language we were using. And we got trained in all kinds of very cool OO stuff by some really, really good people. And we started to work. And we started writing this program. And we went cranking along. And we got a little over a year into this. I think it was around 14 months we were in this. And we had a program that was more or less complete, but it had two small problems. One, it was incredibly slow, just mind-numbingly slow. We could pay the 200 employees in our test group in about a day and a half or something. It was just mind-numbingly slow. And the answers we got out of it were wrong. So two little problems. And so by the time we got to this point, our partners, the consulting company, had lost interest in us because we'd given them all the money we were going to give them, and the project wasn't done yet. And so they were just sort of phoning it in at that point, because if you've ever been around that kind of thing, that's what happens, you know. And so us Chrysler folks sat down and said, what are we going to do? And it was my theory, which was completely wrong, but you know, it's good to have a theory even if it's wrong, that if we got it to run faster, we could figure out the other problem. That's backward, it turns out, but that was my theory. And I had seen on the internet, on Comp Lang Smalltalk, those of you who've been around a while, there was all these discussion groups in the listserv for each of the computer languages, and there was Comp Lang Smalltalk. And so we used to read Comp Lang Smalltalk. And somebody had written, had put a post in every one of these Comp Lang groups asking that somebody familiar with that language write a program to generate the lyrics to 99 bottles of beer on the wall, so they can compare how you would do things across all these languages. 99 bottles of soul on the wall. And I was looking at this, and several people had written programs, and they were mostly kind of crappy. But there was one that was absolutely gorgeous. It was just, this is how code should be written. It had a song class and a chorus class and that beautiful. And you would send it a message of sing, and it would start to generate the lyrics to the 99 bottles of beer on the wall. And there were tests with it, and I'd never seen it automated, an actual test before. We were just coding and hoping. We had somebody who would, go through and type stuff in and look at the answers. That was testing. You try it and see what happens. And he had performance measurement metrics. He had a performance tool he ran against it to show where it was spending its time and what method was spending. It had this beautiful data. And I came and said, this is the guy we should hire. We should bring this guy in to help us. And his name was Kent Beck. And so we got Kent Beck to show up. I didn't know who Kent Beck was. He was the guy who wrote this program about beer, And so Kent showed up, and he started looking at our code and talking to us and all this stuff that was going on. And it was, kind of interesting time. And one of the things he brought with him was this little testing framework he had created in Smalltalk. And of course, now the idea for that is all these tools we have are all based on how that worked. S-Unit. And we didn't call it S-Unit. It was just Kent's testing thing. And the way this original program was architected, you had these collections of transactions of data, and it kind of worked in a backward chaining way. And it would look at the timestamp of when it was updated last, and it would look at the timestamp of the most recent thing that was entered, that was added to it, and determine whether something needed to be updated. And this appeared to be one of the problems in the program, because that wasn't working properly. And so one of our team members, a guy named Ralph Beatty, sat down with Kent and they wrote a little test where they called timestamp now, which is the syntax in Smalltalk, timestamp now, in a loop, and made sure that the one you got now was greater than the one you got before that. Just making sure that time ran forward, and the test failed. Because the architect from this consulting company had written his own timestamp class, and it didn't work. It turns out the milliseconds had to roll over 3 times before the second incremented 1. And so you could have timestamp now be before timestamp a second ago, a millisecond ago. And that told us everything we needed to know about the quality of the work those guys were doing for us. And so after some little political wrangling and some discussions, it was decided to throw all that work away and start again. And so for those of you who have a little hang up about tossing some work and doing it again, we threw away 14 months worth of code and started again. To this day, I am still amazed they didn't fire us. But Kent was a pretty smooth talker, as you probably noticed if you've talked to him. And he went and talked to the CIO and talked her into starting all over again. And she asked him the question that those folks are always going to ask, which is, how long is it going to take? How long is it going to take to do this? And Kent said, I don't know. And you can say, I don't know, as long as you immediately say, but here is how we're going to figure it out. Here's how we're going to find out how long it's going to take. And he said, what we're going to do is we're going to do some work, and we're going to see how long it takes to do it. And we're going to make sure that work is good because we're going to test it. And then we're going to look at all the things we have to do. And then we're just going to make a guess at how long it's going to take, which is how you do everything, really. And that's what we did. And so we started to work again. And really the thing that kicked all that off was we went into a conference room there at this awful building we worked at Chrysler, which had previously been a warehouse. They took a warehouse, they rolled out some carpet, they put in a drop ceiling and moved the programmers into it. When we moved out, they tore it down because they were going to make it into a warehouse again. And the warehouse people said, no, the building's too crappy, we don't want it back. But we worked there for years. But anyway, Kent came in and said, here's how we're going to do this. He said, we have to work in a way that will let people trust us. We have to be responsible. We talked about the things that got programmers in trouble. And one of the things that gets programmers in trouble is we tell them it'll take this long to do, and it takes way longer than that. And so we have to figure out how to be done when we say we're going to get done. And it turns out the secret to doing that is to work iteratively and incrementally so that no matter when the date comes, you have something that works. And it may maybe not be everything they wanted, but if you do the most important stuff first, it'll be good enough and you'll survive. And to be able to do that and to know how fast you're going, the stuff you do has to actually work. Because if the stuff you're building doesn't work, you really don't know how long it took you to do it. And therefore, you don't really know the rate at which you're going. And so we came up with the idea that we needed to test at multiple levels. We needed to test from the standpoint of the customer and from the standpoint of the developers. And so we developed two kinds of tests. You can call them all kinds of names. We like to call them developer tests and customer tests. We figured out that in order to go fast, you have to remove all the roadblocks you have in front of you. You know, things like this code can only be updated by that guy. And we had to figure out how to write code so that everybody understood it. So when somebody came to change it, they would know what it meant. Along the way, we tried stuff that didn't work for us very well. One day, Kent came in and he said his buddy Ward Cunningham has this idea called literate programming, where you basically write a little story about what this code does and you embed the source code in it. So there's big comments about this whole telling the story about it. And we tried that for a few days and we just hated that. We said, no, we hate this. We're not going to do that. Other things we tried were really cool. I was trying to write the code to do the deductions for healthcare. And I just made a hash of it. And I said, let's try, I'm throw it away and try it again. Would somebody come over here and we'll work on it together? Because Ken had been talking about this pair thing. So let's try it for this, because I'm not happy with what I did. Let's try it again. And so I did that. We did it together. Me and another guy did it together. And it was way better. It's way better. And we decided after talking about that and doing some experimentation that we would do that for everything. That took, it was probably in the second or third sprint iteration where we did that. And so we just went down the road and tried things. And if they worked for us, we did them. We kept doing more of them. And if it didn't do very much for us, we stopped. And, you know, the things we didn't do, we didn't keep, you know, I remember a few of them, but not very many, because we tried them for a few days and we stopped. You know, and that's, you know, I think along the way, we made a couple mistakes as far as talking about what we were doing and such. One of them, the big one, I think, is that we placed way too much emphasis on what we did and not enough emphasis on how we figured out what to do. Because really XP is not a set of practices for how you do the work. It's a set of rules and guidelines about how you figure out how to do the work. Because how you do the work is about you and your team and the problem you're trying to solve. And you got a different team and you're a different you than me, and your problem is different than mine. And so the things that are going to work for you are probably going to be different than the things that work exactly for us. But probably how we went about figuring it out was not that different, because we're people and we work differently at that level, you know, and that is try lots of stuff and see what works and do it with a lot of feedback so you know what's happening, and do it in such a way that you can undo it. Because if you can figure out how to do your work so that any decision you make can be undone at some later date, well, that frees you up from all kinds of problems, doesn't it? I think the other thing was that we would explain what we were doing to people, and they would say, yes, that works really well if you have a group of really good people on your team. And we would always say, no, we're just these guys. We just, you know, I was a COBOL programmer. I just came here and learned how to do this. And therefore anybody can learn how to do it. Well, maybe anybody can learn how to do it if you went through the process I went through, which is I sat in a room for I don't know how many hours and days and weeks with a guy named Jim Odell, who invented one of the early object modeling languages and taught us how to model. He's last time I talked to him, he was the chairman of the UML Standards Committee. We knew how to do design because we sat in a room for hours and days with Martin Fowler and talked about how to do design back when Martin Fowler was just this guy nobody ever heard of. And we worked with Kent Beck. He taught us how to program, not how to write, he didn't teach us the syntax. He taught us how to think about the problem and how to solve problems in a way that makes sense. And we had Ron Jeffries, who was beating us over the head every day because Kent was only there about a week a month. And Martin was showing up a week a month and talking to us about what we were doing. And we were evolving these things. And yeah, we started out as just average programmers, but we went through a process that taught us how to do lots of stuff. And we stopped and reflected on what we were doing. And the thing I think that made us think we were just these average programmers is that the people we ran across, the people we interacted with at the outside world were maybe as good, better than us, but they were the very pinnacle. They were the very, very pointy end. And maybe we weren't the pointy end, but we were pretty dang close to it. And so, yeah, I think to do good work, you have to be good at this and you have to pay attention to what you're doing. And we worked really, really hard at trying to get better at what we did. Here's the thing that we did, that if your boss came in and suggested this, you would quit. You'd walk out the door immediately. But we brought in an egg timer and we set it for 15 minutes. And every time the little thing went off, we wrote down what we were doing exactly at that moment. And we set it for another 15 minutes. And we did that for about a week. So we knew what we were doing all through the day, because we wanted to know how to get better at what we were doing. So in order to get better, you got to know what's going on. And so we figured out what it is we're doing all day long. And we talked about how to maximize the ergonomics of coding. Is there something you can do with the keyboard so you don't have to take your hand off and go to the mouse? Is there something you should do with the mouse because it's faster than the keyboard, and all this kind of stuff? And we were using Smalltalk, VisualWorks Smalltalk. So we're on Sun workstations with fancy mice with 3 buttons. You needed all this stuff on all 3 menus on the mouse. You did a lot. I could write a huge amount of code with never touching the keyboard just by doing stuff with the mouse, because I could cut things over here. I've been known to cut and paste periods because my hand was on the mouse already. So, and we learned how to pair program, which is a tough thing to learn, how to work together with somebody. The guy I worked with most of the time, Rich Garzaniti, who actually worked together back on the original, the retiree thing, we would pair program to the point where one of us would type and the other would work the mouse. So none of this nonsense of driver and navigator, we were both hands-on doing stuff. One on the keyboard, one on the mouse, and just having a conversation. We worked as if we were one person with 2 brains, because that's the limiting factor, isn't it? Not how fast you type, but how fast you think. And 2 brains think faster than 1. So that's what we did. And it was hard to not go in on Sunday. Because we were having so much fun that why take a day off from the fun? And my belief is, if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. Because think about why you became a programmer. You became a programmer because it was fun to do that, to make this computer do what you want. Even if it takes, most of the time it isn't doing what you want, and you finally coerce it into doing that thing. And it's such a shot of endorphins to get, that test passing or whatever. And we just loved that so much that we just didn't want to stop doing it. I was at a conference sometime, and Kent was giving a talk about TDD. And he had some code up on the wall with his laptop, and he was walking back and forth talking about stuff. And every time he walked by his laptop, he hit the button and ran the tests. He hadn't done anything else. He just walked by and hit the test, ran the test. He got a green bar. Because you become a green bar junkie, right? You become a junkie to the green bar. And taking a day off from that, you gotta have something else to make up for it. Yeah, so that's how C3 worked. Now we figured out, we thought it would take a total of 11 3-week iterations. And at the end of 11 3-week iterations, we stopped coding and we started doing stuff to put it into production because we had a deadline that we made up ourselves. And if you can't hit the deadline you make up, it's really hard to believe you're really good. If you can't play by the rules you made up, it's hard to have a whole lot of self-esteem. And so yeah, we made up a deadline, and by George, we hit it. And the thing that most people don't know is that in the transition from throwing away the code and starting up again, our boss, the guy who reported to the CIO that we reported to, came to us Chrysler folks and said, I don't care if you write a payroll program or not, but I want you to learn I want you to figure out how to write software in this new paradigm. And I think we hit that out of the park. So if somebody says, well, C3 wasn't successful, I say, you don't know what our orders are. You didn't know what our success criteria was. Our success criteria was to figure out how to do this. And I think we did. I think we've influenced an awful lot about how the world works today. It's not where we thought it was going to be, but that's what happens. The world has its own say into how it evolves, but you can nudge it a little bit. And I think we nudged it a little bit. So that's my story. After that, I just goof off and sit in my basement and talk to people most of the time now. So, look out the window at the azaleas.
So Chet, I heard a rumor that you are the one who invented story points. Is that true?
We did not call them that. And I take blame for it because I believe I'm the person who wrote the chapter in the book describing how we figured out estimation for user stories. So between Ron and I, we take blame for story points. Worst idea ever, story points. Bad idea, don't do it. But this is a learning curve. We tried something. And it's unfortunate that we didn't figure out a better idea or discover a better idea before we wrote down how we ought to do it. We estimated how long it would take to do a piece of work, and time is the only thing that matters. You see a lot of discussion around complexity. Well, I don't give a whatever about complexity. I don't care how complex something is. I care how long it takes, because it turns out your iterations are denominated in time. They're not denominated in effort. If they were, they'd be so many Newton meters in size, right? And they're not denominated in complexity because I have no idea how to measure complexity. What's the standard unit of measure for complexity?
Enterprises.
Yeah.
Free enterprise.
Not?
Yeah.
No, it's not.
And so time is the only thing that matters. And if you don't believe me, look at how long it takes to mow your lawn. Who's here? Steve, how long does it take to mow your lawn, Steve?
30 to 45 minutes.
30 to 45 minutes. How complex is that?
6 knots.
It feels, yeah, it needs to be in knots, but I just go around in circles.
Yeah. You know how long it takes to do cataract surgery? 8 minutes.
Mhm.
8 minutes. Which of those you think is more complex?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't care how complex it is. I care how long it takes to do it. So time is the only thing that matters. And so we estimated in these things we call ideal days. How long would it take us to do this if we didn't have to do anything else? And then we measured how long it actually took to do in real time. And then we use that as a way of kind of figuring out how much stuff we think we could probably do in a sprint, in an iteration. And how long we think we could do an iteration, and maybe how much stuff we thought we could get done between now and we told them we'd be done. And that sort of works reasonably well. The thing that gets folks into trouble is when that leaks out. Because if you only do that within your developers and figure out those things, and nobody else has any idea how you came up with that answer, that's maybe not a bad idea. But what happened is whatever you call them, story points is mostly this idea today, same idea, just a different name, is it leak out. And now the pointy-haired managers are talking about how many of these you get done. And they're challenging you to get more done. And the only way you can deal with that, well, there's 2 ways you can deal with it. One is you can reduce the quality of your product in order to appear to go faster. That works for a little while, not very long, hours maybe. Or you inflate them. You inflate your way out of it. And both of those are stupid answers. And so I don't think they're very useful. And a colleague of ours, a guy who was on our team and then left and moved down the hall and started doing working with another team, came by one day and said, we've stopped doing that whole estimation thing. We just count how many things we get done every sprint. We count how many things we get done every iteration. And he said, that's a whole lot simpler. And we said, well, yeah, certainly it's a whole lot simpler, but you know, some things are this big and some things are that big. And how can he possibly count them all the same? And he said, well, what would you have to do in order to be able to count them all the same? And we said, well, you'd have to kind of make them all about the same size. And he said, that's right. And he left. And so that's a better solution. Count the things they want. That's rule number 1 of measuring stuff, right? Measure the thing you want. Don't measure something else if you can measure the thing they actually want, or you actually want. They want stuff in their program that does the things they want. So count those things. And if that doesn't work for you, figure out how to make those a little bit smaller so that you can count them all the same. It turns out now that if you're doing something like story points now, go off and do a little report, do a little analysis and see how much variation you have iteration to iteration, sprint to sprint, on how many story points you're getting done. And map that against how many backlog items you're getting done sprint to sprint, and see which one has less noise in it. And I would be willing to wager something trivial that there's less variation in the user story count than there is in the story point count, because everybody who's done it and come back and told me, they've said there's less variation in the user story count. And so maybe without doing anything at all, counting is better than the story points. And if it's not, the things you do in order to make it work have positive side effects. Because if you have some big user story, value is not evenly distributed across it. There's clumps of value within it and stuff that isn't particularly interesting. And if you split those up and do the valuable clumps first, you may discover you never have to do the unvaluable bits. And so that's a cool way of making things smaller. Just find the most valuable thing and do that little slice of it first, and the next one. And after a while, the stuff that's left isn't interesting. The analogy I use for this is mortadella. You all know what mortadella is? I would have bet Chris would know what mortadella is. No? Mortadella is an Italian deli meat. And it comes in a big roll like that, and it's got little clumps of good stuff in it, like pork fat and pistachios and stuff like that. You know what it is, right? And the rest of it is bologna. The rest of it's bologna. Your user stories are exactly like that. There's little clumps of value, good stuff, and the rest of it's bologna. And what you want to do is slice it up into smaller bite-sized pieces and eat the good parts and leave the bologna behind. And then it doesn't matter how much stuff you have left to do at the end when the time and the money runs out, because you've eaten all the good stuff and all that's left is bologna. I've been trying to write an article, and I'll probably publish it here in a week or so, because for some reason I have really great ideas, and I tell them to Jeffries and he writes the article, but I thought I'd write this article. Because I was thinking about, how do you sustain a project over time? And an interesting thing came to me. Back starting in the mid 1800s, all the way up until about 1960 or so, there were all these stories, books, movies made about going to the moon. You all ever seen those movies from like the 1950s about going to the moon, where they go off and they build this great big rocket, right? Great big rocket. And they all get in it and they blast off and they go to the moon, and sometimes they make it. And sometimes they get to the moon, and sometimes they make it back, and sometimes they don't. But there was, a good time was had by all, right? And this is a traditional PMI, project management approach to going to the moon. You build a big ass rocket, you blast off, you go there and do it, one big go and back. Well, those of you who are as old as I know that isn't how we did it, is it? We sent one guy up, straight up and back. And we sent another guy straight up and back. Then we sent a guy around in orbit, and we did that for three or four times. And then we sent two guys up, and they did that a while. And then we sent three guys up, and they did that a while. And finally, we went to the moon. We did everything in an iterative, incremental fashion, because there was all kinds of stuff we needed to learn. And that's a lot like software development. We have to learn a lot of stuff. And we had to build a whole lot of infrastructure. And that's kind of like software development. And we had to keep the people who were funding us happy. And that's sure like software development. As the second guy to go up said, Gus Grissom famously said, "No bucks, no Buck Rogers." And so the way NASA did it was they did this iterative, incremental thing, but they always had a show so that the American public saw what was going on and wanted more of it and said, yeah, we're getting value out of this. So Congress would give them the billions and billions of dollars it takes to do it. And there's a lesson there for us, right? Mm-hmm. Because if they don't see stuff from us really frequently, they're going to start wondering why they're paying us. And that's not a question you ever want the guy who's paying you to ask. How come we're paying you?
Well,
yeah.
And you forgot about a couple dogs and some chimps and some spacewalks.
Yeah, that's just trivial. That's just, that's footnotes.
Yeah,
Footnotes.
but as soon as they put people on it, they weren't as agile. They were not able to be as flexible with what they were doing as soon as they put people on it.
Yeah, because you can't. You kill people. People get upset.
Yep.
Other people get upset.
And funding bucks.
Funding. That's right.
Yeah.
So we have to work in a different sort of way. And it's just like anything. Once you have the installed base, you have to act differently.
Mhm.
One of the great old jokes in software development. There's only like three jokes in software development. And one of them is, the customer comes in and says, how long will you take you to do this? And we say 7 months or whatever it is. 14 months, whatever it is. And the customer says, 14 months? It only took the good Lord 7 days to create the heaven and earth. And the programmer says, yes, but he didn't have an installed base. Right? Because once you ship the first time and people are using it, you now have a contract with them, right? You can't just change anything you want. Once you have an installed base, you have to work differently. And that's kind of the same sort of thing. Once you have people in space, you can't go back to sending dogs and chimps up. So
I need to know the other two jokes.
programmer calls up his wife at the end of the day. Says, honey, I'm on my way home. Do you need me to do anything? And she says, yeah, I like to stop at the store and get a loaf of bread. And if they have eggs, get a dozen. And so the programmer shows up at home with 12 loaves of bread. I can't think of the other one. It'll come to me. I told this joke at Christmas one year, and my sister and her husband were both programmers. And they laughed. And their two daughters looked at each other and said, well, this explains something about them. Because there's something that they know is funny that we don't understand at all, because, they didn't understand, how that logic works, because that's what would happen if you programmed it, right? That's why we need the customer test.
Being that this is the .NET user group, I'll supply the third joke. Knock knock.
Who's there?
JavaScript.
Oh, see, I thought it was, there are 10 types of programmers that understand binary.
Off by one joke.
Yeah, I think there's another one in there someplace, and it'll come to me. So I don't know. I forget them. I tell you my UDP jokes, but still got my. That's a good one. That's a good one. So maybe there's more than just 3 programmer jokes. I don't know. That might be a network joke. I'm not sure. So what else you want to talk about?
And it's super intriguing. Thanks for sharing. I'm just interested, back in you were saying about learning, how did the guys know what questions to ask? How did they know, as they came in every couple of weeks to train you and you guys were all just kind of working together? What was dawning on you that, oh, that's a good question to ask? Or were you just falling forward? How did you know what questions you needed to ask?
With questions with regard to how we were going to work?
Yeah,
or...
you had mentioned, some of the guys by name that would come by and bring their unit testing framework or whatever, and you learned a ton as you just.
Yeah, we had Kent and Martin who were coming in about once a month.
So
what? And we had Ron who was there full time, and Ron was talking to them the whole time. And so they knew what was going on, and they knew what we were struggling with, and certainly Kent had mapped out in his head kind of the progression of where he thought we wanted to go. And so I believe he had a pretty good vision of what XP wanted to be from a technical practices standpoint. And he was just rolling them out at the rate at which he thought we could absorb them and prove them out. So I think to some degree, we were walking down the path that he had laid out for us, but there were deviations where something didn't really work, or we thought something else would be better. And we would sit down and talk to them. They would come in and talk to us about what's going on, and we'd show them what we've done. We talked about what we'd had trouble with and what our challenges were. We talked about parts of the code that we didn't think were as good as they ought to be, but we didn't know what to do about it. And so it was a very open discussion because we were all in this together. You know, I did not know it at the time, but Kent's compensation was highly tied to us getting done on time. And he was going to get done on time no matter what, because there was a very, very large bonus involved as far as he was concerned for that. And so, yeah, but we spent an awful lot of time stopping and looking at what we were doing. We spent a whole lot of time in what we now call retrospective, every few days as the team and little groups going on, talking about what we were doing and how things were going and where we thought we needed to improve and that kind of stuff. So we spent a huge amount of time reflecting on how things were going. And we use those guys to help us figure those things out.
Okay, so Chet, as one of the
I'm
original
sorry,
members
Joe,
of-
is that a good answer? You have a follow-up before we go down to Tim?
Well, I certainly don't want to cut Tim off now, but I did, Tim, if you don't mind, I just wanted to say that your answer is good. And one of the things is about the questioning of how do you know that something's not right? Like how did it dawn on you that you were unhappy with something? Was it just a sense where I don't like this, or were you searching for things that you didn't like?
I think it was a combination of both. That we were learning what it should feel like to some degree. Because this way of working feels different than the way we previously worked. And some of it is a little bit of scariness, and some of it is a little bit of confidence. And finding the right blend of those things is kind of important. We used to talk a lot about flow and what we could do to improve flow. That once we got down working on something, what allowed us to move through that as quickly as possible? What about the code we had written previously impacted that flow? What about how we were working impacted that flow? And so that caused us to think a lot about not only the architecture and the implementation of the code, but our working environment. We started out working in a row of cubicles in with all the other programmers. And we found problems with that, or not necessarily problems, but we felt there were opportunities for improvement. And so eventually, as a happy happenstance, the payroll department had actually moved into the IT department's building. And there was a walled off area with controlled access into the payroll group, because the people doing payroll and the programming of the payroll were so tightly coupled that the payroll people thought there was advantage to being where the support folks were. And so he moved into our building. And so they actually took a room that had the equipment that was used to seal, fold and seal the paychecks, and move them into another little cubby and built us a room where we could work. And so we had this room within the room of payroll that we could go into and work right with the payroll folks. And because this room had previously been an equipment room, it had linoleum on the floor, whereas everything else was carpeted in that lovely brown nondescript carpet that you have in offices. And about once a month, once every 2 months, I would call up, because for some reason, I don't know how I got this job. I would call up the building manager and have him send his crew in and wash and wax our linoleum floor. And he would always say, we could put down carpet for you. And I always said, no, I don't want carpet. Because our chairs don't roll as easily on the carpet as it does the linoleum. And we worked in this open space, and we had no fixed workstations. We would just slide on our chairs from where we were to where somebody else was. We had little cubicles along the wall where we kept our stuff, but we would work in this kind of open place, and we wanted our chairs to slide around easier. And so we didn't want the carpet, we wanted the linoleum because our chairs rolled smoother. How many teams have you been on where you talked about the floor covering? And so we were actively thinking about all the stuff we thought would make our lives better. We had these lovely Sun workstations, Sun Spark workstations. And we decided we wanted bigger monitors because, well, you know, we're programmers, we want bigger monitors. And so we put in a request with Ron Savage, the guy who told us, you know, to figure out how to do software, that we get bigger monitors. We wanted, I don't know, we had little monitor, I don't know how big they were. They probably cost who knows how much money. And I was walking down the hall one day, and Ron said, come in here, office, I want to talk to you. And he said, you know, you guys have asked for these new big monitors. Is it going to be worth it? Because for me to buy these monitors for you, I'm going to have to lay off a couple contractors because I got a budget I got to stay within. Would it be worth it? And I said, it will be if you let me pick the guys you lay off. And we got the monitors. Now, I don't know, I don't remember if you laid anybody off or not, but we got the monitors. You know, and so you sometimes, you know, you say, okay, we think this will make us better for us. And so, you know, you give it your best shot. So, yeah. So, but if you just stop and think about it every now and then, figure out what can we try, and is that better or worse? You know, sometimes just like going to the eye doctor. Is it A better than B? You try them and see which one it is. And if you do it in a way where you can roll back, it don't matter, right?
Thanks, that makes sense.
Yeah. Tim, you had a question?
I did. I was curious, as one of the founders of like XP, what your thoughts are on the scaled agile frameworks that are popular these days.
You know, my friend Martin Fowler famously said that SAFE stands for Shitty Agile for Enterprises. But you didn't hear that from me. If you think about where we are in the arc of Agile, I've been doing this for 26 years. I've been talking to people about XP for 24 or 25 years. The Agile Manifesto is over 20 years old. The folks who are coming to this world today are very risk averse. They're not the cool kids, I'm afraid. The cool kids are doing something we haven't even heard of yet. I wish I knew what the cool kids were doing, because that's what I want to do. And SAFE makes perfect sense to those folks who are very risk averse, who don't want to be taught how to figure out what your process ought to be. They want to be told what their process should be. These are folks who do what the Gartner group says everybody's doing, because everyone knows that you can dominate your competition by doing exactly what they're doing. And so I think SAFE makes sense to those people. It isn't what I would do, because I'm not optimizing for security and safety. I'm optimizing to be able to react quickly to change. And so think about the difference between a freight train and a jet fighter. A freight train is all about efficiency. It's all about alignment. Alignment, one of the principles of SAFE is alignment. We get everybody going in the same direction. And that works really well if you're going the right place. But if the world is changing around us, we're not going to put the track where it needs to be a month from now. We put the track where we think it ought to be now. You think about a jet fighter, it's twitchy. Jet fighters are twitchy. So you can react very quickly. XP is a jet fighter. It's about being twitchy. And you have to have a certain level of skill to fly that thing. You know, there's some certainly metro kind of systems that run without a driver. The computer runs it because it's going down the track and it knows where it's going to stop and it knows this and knows that. Yeah. So I think it's a question of what the problem you're trying to solve is. And it's possible that in a given situation, SAFE might be exactly the right solution. Those are not the places that interest me. And like I said, I'm more interested in being able to react very quickly to change, which is actually what the word Agile means, isn't it? So I, the only thing that bothers me really about scaled Agile is the fact that they put Agile in the name. If they'd called it something else, it wouldn't have bothered me a bit. If they'd have called it what they originally called it, which was the rational unified process, because SAFE is just a rational unified process with a little bit of Agile speak sprinkled on top of it. If you go back and look at Dean Leffingwell's background, he's a RUP guy. He never did come to any Agile parties that I ever know of. He was a RUP guy. So that's what I think about it.
Thanks, Chet. Appreciate it.
I have a short question about the origins of stand-up. I've always been told that it was to keep meetings short, but then I read in some like XP mailing list forums, somewhere I could never find again, is that you started standing up to talk about what you're doing so that you wouldn't be tempted to stare at your monitor and actually look each other in the eye. So could you elaborate a little bit more about that?
All those things are probably true. And we moved away from our desks to a place away because we didn't want to be distracted. We didn't want people looking at their monitors. We wanted to talk to each other. We wanted the meeting to be short, so we didn't bother to bring chairs with us, even though they rolled nicely across the floor. And so we wanted to keep the meeting very short. And we had a team that was probably 12 to 16 people. And we wanted to keep it very, very short. Because if we didn't, it could have gone on for a long time, and we knew we didn't want to do that. So it was how do we keep this meeting as short as possible? We'll stand up. And sometimes that didn't even work. And so we tried all kinds of interesting things. My favorite, and you're certainly free to try this if you feel that your stand-ups are going too long, is that one of our guys, Doug Joppy, had fallen out of his tree stand during deer season. And he had a 5-pound weight at his desk that he would use to rehab his shoulder. And we brought his 5-pound weight to our daily stand-up, and you could talk for as long as you could hold it like that at shoulder height. And if that doesn't speed up your stand-up, try a 10-pound. Now, I have shoulder problems now. That may or may not have anything to do with that, but that is an absolutely true story. We had a 5-pound weight you held like that so you could talk. So I think it was a combination of all those things. And now, it's a good idea to get together, particularly, well, if you're a team who is working together on a common problem, you'll need to talk to each other and you need to know what everybody's doing. That's one of the ways as a coach, it's really easy to find out whether you have a team or a work group who just have the same boss and are working on things that might be might touch, but aren't really working on the same things. Because if you have this daily stand-up and nobody's listening to what anybody else is saying, well, they're really not working together very closely, are they? And maybe they're not a team. And if they're not a team, then lots of the stuff we talk about as far as how teams should work together goes out the window because you don't have a team. And making people work as if they are a team when they aren't will probably generate more pushback than anything else because it doesn't make any sense to them. One of the interesting things you find in the SAFE world is this big all hands meeting. You've heard about this big all hands meeting where everybody comes together and does this big planning session. A half or more of the teams I talk to who are using SAFE, the people in that planning meeting aren't working on the same stuff. And so this is just a nonsensical thing. I say it's like having the football team, the tennis team, and the swim team, and the debate team come together and work out how they're going to do stuff. Because they're not doing anything near the same thing. And so having a planning meeting with those 4 groups involved, trying to come together with a common plan is just nonsense. And so it only makes sense to have a common planning meeting if you're one big team working on one problem. Otherwise, you're just annoying everybody and wasting everybody's time. And time is the most precious thing we have. Because you don't know how much you're going to get. And when it's up, it's up. And do you really want to spend the last hour of it in that all hands planning meeting on stuff that you don't care about? So at the very least, that would be impolite, and I don't want to do that to somebody. So that's all I remember about that, Tim. Listen, what else you got? Because I got a piece of cake upstairs I'm supposed to eat.
Do we have a limit, Dustin?
I think our limit is the pull of
cake
right now. Yeah.
Chet, I want you to follow up on what you were just saying.
Okay.
I find the team size thing interesting as I move through different organizations. And how have you found success for teams that are large and provide opportunities for the change to be, for the questions, the change, the controversies to be talked about, where the larger the group, people tend to be quiet and they reserve what their opinions are. And I like the cohesive team working on one thing, but I'm finding the larger teams don't adapt and change because they're afraid to talk. How have you seen ways through that to get people to open up and be controversial and to talk about things that are bothering them when they may feel like they're the only ones? Is it because the team's too large, or is there something else?
Well, you want to be able to express your opinions and you want to feel safe in it. And so you have to go through some kind of team building process, and it's going to be different team to team, I think, to make sure that people are comfortable with each other and aren't afraid of what's going to happen if they say something. And now, of course, most of us had gone through this incredible crucible of failure and starting again. And so we had tremendous team cohesion. So that was not a thing we really had to worry about, although we did things to bring about us working together better. And we created rules for ourselves, what Scrum would call a working agreement, to define how we would work together and to address the things that allowed us to work with a high degree of comfort. And a lot of those rules had to do with interpersonal kinds of things. We had a rule about, we had several rules about food, because food is important. Because nothing builds a community like eating together. And so we would go out of our way to make sure we would eat together. We had a rule that there always had to be food in our team room. I gained 20 pounds, I imagine, during the project. We always had to have food. Sometimes it was something stupid. Twizzlers. I hate Twizzlers, but Twizzlers. We had a couple of rules about pizza. One of the rules about pizza is you can't have too much pizza. So no matter how many pizzas you think you're going to get one more, because you can't have too much pizza. The other rule I remember about pizza is double bacon. If you're going to put bacon on a pizza, get double bacon, because double bacon is always better. Double bacon, you can stand the pineapple ones if you got double bacon, it turns out. And so you want to address that head on. And you might do that in small groups, individually, and talk about how do we get together and how do we become a team? How do we have confidence in each other? One of the things is to always remember that you are not your code. You are not your code. Your code may suck, but you're a wonderful person. And we can fix the code. We can fix the code, but you're good. You're perfect right now. So don't worry about that. And so you have to come together and think about it, I'm probably not the right person to really talk about this question, because I'm a computer programmer, and as far as I'm concerned, you're all just meat widgets, and so, I didn't get into this business to talk about feelings and stuff. I want to know, is this the right algorithm for that problem? And how can I write it better? But it's a tough problem, and those things are hard. And you want to come together and figure out how we're going to do stuff. You guys, you said you had a Hill here a month ago, right? Had Hill. One of the cool things Hill does, he's done this at conferences I've been at, and we've talked about it in our little Tuesday night things, is you get everybody together and you break them up into little groups of 2 or 3 people. And you say, okay, here's a question for you. You guys have 3 minutes to answer this question. Of the 6 surfaces in this room, the 4 walls, the ceiling, and the floor, which is best? Come back to me in 3 minutes with an answer. It turns out this is an incredibly easy question to answer. Anybody know why this is an easy question to answer? It doesn't matter. It's a stupid question. It doesn't matter. And if we work really hard to make sure every decision we make is undoable, they all turn into stupid questions. because we can change our mind later when we have a better idea. And so it doesn't matter whether we do it this way or that way, because tomorrow we'll come up with something better and we'll replace it anyway. You always want to remember, is this the hill I want to die on? And it almost never is. You know, who cares where the curly braces go? Just because, just because C# does it wrong, doesn't make you all bad people. Because I can run a little thingy and put them in the right place. I got a program that'll reformat. I don't worry about that stuff. And so if every decision we make is undoable, then which one gets us to the next step fastest and lets us learn stuff quicker? And if you start thinking about those things and believe everybody is important and listen to what people say and give people the opportunity to say things, then they'll learn it's okay. That the thing about real Agile, good Agile, XP, is that we give up certain freedoms, but we get a whole lot back in return. We have to work the way our team works. I can't just do the stuff my way. I have to do it the way we do it. But I gain a whole lot of freedom. I get to pick what I'm going to work on. And I get to say how long it's going to take me to do it. And I get to have ownership of how we work. And that's worth an awful lot. That autonomy is incredibly valuable to us. And so I give up a little bit of stuff that really doesn't matter about how we name things, maybe, or this or that or whatever. Because you forget which way you thought was important a month from now, because this is just how we do it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So that's the best answer I can give you on that, because I'm a programmer and you're all just, that's what I do. What else we got? I'm not going to read the questions because it's in small writing. Do I see research expert ideas with ModPro? XP never went away. It's evolved in interesting ways. Some of it is underground, percolating under the Scrum hegemony. But you found an awful lot of folks who are trying to figure out how to do things better, and they've used the ideas we had 25 years ago as a jumping off place. I think one of the things that really separates Scrum and XP from a conceptual level is that Scrum is frozen in time from essentially 30 years ago. You talk to the creators of Scrum, they say Scrum doesn't change. Our understanding of Scrum changes, but Scrum doesn't change. We just learn to explain it better. Yeah, okay. Well, I sure hope that the best idea we had on how to work together wasn't 30 years ago. I hope we've been learning better ways of working. I think I've read a document. I think I signed a document years ago that said something about learning better ways of doing things. And so a few years ago, Ron and I were going to speak at some conference as we used to do. And we were trying to figure out what we were going to talk about. And when we were asked to talk, the person who asked us suggested we talk about how we would do XP today if we were coming up with it from scratch. And after trying to think of something more interesting to talk about, we decided to talk about that. And so I went off and I thought about what would XP be like today. And that's what we talked about. And if you go out to Ron's website, because I have ideas and Ron writes about them, you'll see this thing we came up with, which we call 12. Because Kent said XP is about turning the dials up to 11. Turn the dial on the things that are good that we want to do, turn those dials to 11, and the things that aren't helping us very much, turn them to 0. So I said, let's call this 12 because it's one more than 11, you know, that's kind of cute. And I thought about what things we knew about today that we didn't know 25 years ago. And so Ron and I came up with a process that had as little in it as possible, because I believe that the way you improve a real Agile process is by taking stuff out. And Kent said very, very early on that the biggest flaw in XP was the division between the technical people and the business people. But we didn't know what to do about it. We didn't know how to solve that problem 25 years ago. Today, we know how to solve that problem, right? It's called mob. You have everybody sitting around a table together. The business people, the technical people, everybody sitting around a table together, working on something together. And so when you have that, the titles don't matter anymore, because a programmer can have a good product idea, and maybe a business person could have a good design idea. You don't care, as long as it's the best idea, you do it. And so I did away with roles. 12 doesn't have any roles. We just have everybody we need. I did away with iterations, because why have an artificial box? And so we have just these ideas that some stuff is going to take this long to do, and some stuff is going to take that long to do, but inside that big thing there might be little things. And so we have all these little composites of time, and that's okay. But I did away with the backlog, because backlog's a dumb idea. We did away with backlog. And so we said, if you have an idea for a feature, write a test to show how it's supposed to work and put it in the automated testing tool. And that's all you need is, and if that's something we should work on, we work on it until the test passes. And if we don't like it, we'll just throw it away someday. So don't do that. Just, you're sitting around the table talking to it. You don't need to have that intermediate thing, right? And the joy of that is it does away with that I once so that crap. You know, as in the side. This whole talk's asides. But that whole, you know, I want so that. Well, people say, well, that, you know, at the best, that's training wheels. Training wheels, right? Anybody taught any kids how to ride a bicycle in the past couple of years?
Take out the training wheels.
Chris, did you put training wheels on the bike?
No.
No. How come?
Because
that's not how you do it, is it?
Yeah.
You put them on the bike and you shove them off, right?
Took
Run
off
along
the
beside it.
pedals.
What?
And took off the pedals and let them be able to put their feet down at any point.
Yeah, yeah. So it turns out if you have training wheels, A, that's not how they do it anymore. And B, if you do it, the big kids will make fun of you. Right? The big kids make fun of the kids with the training wheels. So don't have training wheels. Just jump to the right thing. Yeah, take the pedals off, but it's your bicycling with two wheels, because that's what you're trying to learn how to do, isn't it? You're not trying to ride a bicycle. You're not trying to ride a quadricycle. You're trying to ride a bicycle. Right? So yeah. So anyway, I pulled out all this stuff and just made it the simplest thing possible. Somebody put a link there to 12. So, and for the most part, I didn't make any of that stuff up. These are things that people told me they're doing. Just like XP, Kent didn't invent those things. He just collected them from places that were already being used and put them together. So that's kind of what I did. I collected things and put them together. You may discover you're doing it already. I don't know. Send me $5 if you are. What else you got?
You mentioned a document that that you signed at one point. When you first signed that document, where do you think that was going to go?
I had no idea. There had been at least one other attempt to get people together from the lightweight methods to talk about what we all had in common. Dave Thomas from Big Dave. There's several Dave Thomases, not Pragmatic Dave, but Big Dave Thomas. Had tried to put together a meeting down in the Caribbean someplace where he has a house, but that didn't come out. And so Alistair Coburn was going to get people together out in Snowbird because he lived in Utah, and we were going to get people out in Utah together. And I was, talking to people who were going, Ron and Kent and Martin and whatever. And I actually called Alistair and said, I hear you having this meeting, do you think I ought to come? And we talked about it a little bit, and he had 17 or 18 people coming, and 3 or 4 of them had been on our team at Chrysler. And it's like, well, I probably don't need to go. So I didn't go to the meeting. If I'd known how it was going to turn out, I'd have gone to the meeting, because that was a mistake. I should have gone to the meeting, because it would have been better for me to have gone to the meeting. Once they came back, and I was working with Martin at the time, he said that they did this thing, and that Ward had made a website. We could go see it and sign your name. So I went and signed my name. I was the first person to do that. We had no idea what it was going to be. We were rolling along. We were having conferences. I think the XP Universe conference was already going on at that point. Down, that Bob Martin was sponsoring at the time. And so we were talking, and XP was the thing we were talking about. Scrum didn't have much mindset yet, and because mostly this was stuff being talked about by the people who did the work. Because it is, as I like to remind people occasionally, it is the Agile Manifesto for software development, not the Agile Manifesto for those who manage people who do software development. Although we tend to forget that today with the Scrum kind of world, and the Scrum folks, which I sort of in one foot in the Scrum camp just for pecuniary reasons, have been very successful in but the problem is, and I think I started to say this earlier, is that XP has continued to evolve with new ideas. The XP today is not the XP from 25 years ago. And I think that's really good. And the direction that the Scrum world took through having an official description of it, the Scrum Guide, and having certification based on that, has frozen Scrum basically to where it was 25, 30 years ago. Whereas XP, being this thing out in the wilderness, has continued to evolve. And people are coming up with new and better ideas, and ideas that we didn't think were, never occurred to us. And that's one of the reasons I go to conferences is to find out what people are really doing, so I can steal the ideas, because that's where you learn things. That's where the ideas come from, is people try stuff and they come up with new things. And so, I imagine there's probably people here on this call who are doing things differently than we would have done, and they're having success, and that's wonderful. That's how this world's supposed to happen. That's how evolution is supposed to work. You try new things, and some of it works and some of it doesn't. And that wildness of it, the unplanned nature of it, the uncontrolled nature of it, is what gives you the opportunity to make great leaps forward. I read some article many years ago talking about the increase in the running speed of thoroughbred horses over the past 100 years. And thoroughbred horses have, by and large, gotten a little bit faster, but not that much, really. It's been a very small increase, even though thoroughbred horses are bred intentionally under great scrutiny, and they decide this dam and this sire and blah, 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 and all that. And they get very minor increases. Whereas the speed at which the very best human runners run has increased tremendously because we have the opportunity, the variation is much wider. And because the variation is much wider, the top end speed gets better. And so maybe there's folks who are slower than they would have been under more controlled circumstances, but it doesn't matter if you look at the top end. And whereas thoroughbreds are all run within a fairly small range, humans have a much wider range, and we're increasing at a much faster rate because of that. Because we're not trying to figure out these things. We just, we choose in a different way. So, and I think that's good. The wildness helps.
Any other questions?
I have cake.
There's cake. All right, I'm not hearing any more.
Cake time.
Cake time. We do have a drawing, and it is for a license from JetBrains, and I will get to that soon, but I'm going to take care of the important part first and say, Chet, thank you so much.
I have a JetBrains license, so I'm good.
We're actually going to have a JetBrains license.
No, I haven't. I think I just renewed it. So
Would you stay if it was a cake drawing, though?
I have a freezer full of cake because every year, once a year, we have what's called the dessert party. And I bake for about a week. And what people don't eat go into my freezer. And I'm having a piece of cake left over from the dessert party about a month ago. So
Nice.
in addition to being whatever I am, I bake. So
That's a fabulous idea.
yeah. Because who doesn't like cake? Cool. Okay, cool. Enjoyed being with you all.
Thank you.
I'm going to bug out.
Take it easy. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you.